Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 403. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Today joined by co-host Connor Freeman. Connor, how you doing?
Doing great, Kyle. How are you?
Pretty well, Connor. Got quite a bit to talk about today. Very important news. So I want to get into it. Just remind people that they could find the show at the Libertarian Institute, where we both work and write articles pretty frequently, on the blog at antiwar.com. YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version of the show. And you can also check out the show anywhere you listen to podcasts. You find the show on the Twitter handle at con_interest. You can follow myself on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. And Connor, what is your Twitter handle again?
At Freeman's Mind 96.
All right, and with that, let's get into the show. The first article I have up today is Senate votes to repeal the Iraq War AUMF. So these are the 2002 and the 1991 authorizations for use of military force. The vote passed with 66 to 30. I think most of the no votes are actually Republicans, but this is just a symbolic move. And so, Connor, it's just like you expect. I see Chuck Schumer and a lot of other congressional Democrats in particular really patting themselves on the back for this, like they're fulfilling promises to rein in endless war or something like that. And in, reality, Connor, this is a symbolic move. I mean, we do have this cited by the Trump administration when they took out Soleimani in 2020, and so it's not like this is never used, but at the same time, they use all kinds of different parts of the Constitution, like Article 2 or the 2001 AUMF to really carry out the bulk of the military actions overseas. And so this isn't really a big deal because we saw last week that Senator Rand Paul offered an amendment to repeal the 2001 AUMF, but it didn't come close to passing, failing with a vote of 9-86. And so, that tells me, Connor, that there's really 9 people in Congress that are interested in ending the endless wars, the wars on terror, or at least 9 people in the Senate. And then there are about 54, I guess, posers who will, make the vote that they think is the right vote, when it's politically convenient, the symbolic vote about the 2002 and the 1991 AUMF. So this is disappointing. I do understand that Biden's going to sign it, and I think for a lot of the same reasons that they think that this will be like a political win, when really it's just symbolic. Now, unfortunately, Connor, I don't think the American people really know enough about how, these war authorizations work and everything. So I'm not exactly, maybe they will be able to sell it as a win, but I'm really hoping people realize that this isn't going to change American foreign policy whatsoever. Now, Senator Rand Paul, that is, has been doing some great things over the past couple of weeks. Connor, he introduced the, 2001 AUMF repeal, and he's taken on not only a member of his own party, but I would say somebody who oftentimes is a political ally of his in a very big way. So this is from Dave DeCamp, March 29th, antiwar.com. Senator Rand Paul plans to block a bill introduced by Senator Josh Hawley that would ban the popular video sharing app TikTok, the Hill reported on Wednesday. Hawley's bill, the No TikTok on United States Devices Act, would prohibit the app from being downloaded in the United States and ban commercial activity with TikTok's parent company, the Chinese-based ByteDance. The legislation is much more narrow than the Restrict Act that was introduced in the Senate and has received 21 co-sponsors. So I think that's probably the bigger threat, the Hawley legislation. He's more of a marginal figure, doesn't have quite the notoriety of some of these other senators who have signed on to the Restrict Act. So probably not as big of a deal to, for Rand Paul to shut this down at this time. But at the same time, again, Rand Paul standing against Hawley on this is pretty big. So Hawley was hoping his legislation would pass by unanimous consent, but Paul has broken that with the rest of the House GOP and come out against banning TikTok, saying it would emulate China's internet censorship. So, good on Paul for this. We'll see what comes out of this, Connor. I'm not sure if you use TikTok. I don't. So, in a sense, I kind of think that the app is probably not great. I see a lot of people using it, and just the way they scroll through the videos, it seems almost like I go like to a casino or something, the way people watch as like they hit the slot machines. I feel like there's some of that with TikTok. Like it's so much sensory engagement and everything that people really almost get addicted to it. But at the same time, the solution here isn't for the government to come in and ban it. It's just for people to, use their phones more responsibly and probably, keep it out of the hands of their very young children. But Congress is all in on this kind of Cold War mentality. And there's a great article. I believe it's in the Quincy Institute, but it might be in Slate. It's by Branko March-Teach, and he goes through and explains how the recent congressional hearing about TikTok was really all about ramping up the Cold War with China. So all very interesting stuff here, Connor. Let's move on. Next article here, we're getting into some Ukraine war stuff. Russia says Ukraine using longer range U.S. provided rockets. So Moscow announced that it downed for the first time a longer range rocket that the U.S. has provided to Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry says it downed a ground launched small diameter bomb, a munition made by Boeing that could hit targets up to 94 miles away. And this is twice as far as of range as the HIMARS rockets that the U.S. has provided in the past. So they say they intercepted 18 of the HIMARS system rockets and one of the ground launched small diameter bombs over a 24-hour period. Who knows how true this is? My guess is that they probably have hit one of these small diameter bombs at this point, and that's why they're coming out and saying it. The U.S. has already said that these are on the battlefield in Ukraine, so that's nothing new. And this is the kind of thing we probably see in the war, Connor, quite a bit, is where when a new technology is introduced, maybe it does have some success, but as advanced as a lot of these air defense systems are, they learn how to pick up on the signatures of these different kind of munitions and then get more effective in shooting them down. All right, let's move on here. This is a very important article. Now, I think there could be kind of a couple layers of propaganda here, but I definitely think it's worth talking about. Zelensky says if he loses Bakhmut, he will be pushed to compromise with Russia. So this was reported by the Associated Press on Wednesday that the city of the Donbass city of Bakhmut falls to Russia. He will be pressed to compromise. Our society will feel tired if the Russians win Bakhmut, Zelensky said. Our society will push me to have to compromise with them. Now, Connor, I guess my initial reaction to this is Kiev is basically trying to push their Western partners to send more aid to Ukraine because they need it to keep fighting the war, and certainly, as they've said, to wage any kind of counteroffensive. But at the same time, I think they feel like the one thing they could use to pressure the West into giving them more support is to say that, we're going to have to cede in this war. I think that's, what we've talked about on the show and what we've really seen throughout this war is that the Western goal isn't to help Ukraine win. It's to keep Ukraine fighting. And so if Ukraine's saying, if we lose this battle, we're going to have to stop fighting, maybe they think that's what will get them that next influx of aid. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. At the same time, Ukraine has been saying all along that Bakhmut is extremely key to their defensive line. They've had I believe their top military, as far as rank goes, commander saying that, this is important strategic for the entire front holding together. I think Zelensky has said that there would be an open road through the Donbass, primarily the Donetsk region, if Bakhmut were to fall. And then on the other side of this, the Americans have called this purely symbolic and saying that it doesn't have much strategic value at all. And so, it would be a huge egg on the face of the Americans here if this city falls and suddenly Ukraine is in a position where it has to negotiate, because it turns out this wasn't symbolic. It was really strategic. Now, of course, there could be a little bit of this kind of feeding back into itself, Connor, where Ukraine has now committed so many resources to the city. It's gone from being symbolic to strategic because they really don't have the ability to send men or military equipment elsewhere because it's all been destroyed and all the soldiers have been killed in Bakhmut. But we will see what happens. It does look like I think that city will fall in the coming weeks here, Connor. Now let's move on to the article that we wrote yesterday for the Libertarian Institute. All right, this is titled, White House Wants to Form International Tribunal to Prosecute Russian Leader for War Crimes. And so after months of indecision, the Joe Biden administration has come out in favor of using international mechanisms to punish Russian officials for the crime of aggression in Ukraine. The White House has resisted Kiev's effort to prosecute Vladimir Putin and other Russian leaders at the International Criminal Court, the ICC, over fears that American officials could face similar accountability. And then this is the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice, Beth Van Schleck, and she announced the decision Monday. She said, "At this critical moment in history, I am pleased to announce that the United States supports the development of international tribunal dedicated to prosecution of the crime of aggression against Ukraine," she said. And then she added, "There are compelling arguments why the crime of aggression must be prosecuted alongside other crimes that are being investigated by the ICC." Van Schleck also discussed involving Ukraine's judicial system and the European Court in the prosecution. So, Connor, I'm not sure exactly if the U.S. has even worked out all the details of how they want this to happen. They had this very complicated legal loophole they're trying to jump through where they're going to support the ICC against Russia, but at the same time not support the ICC because American officials have committed far worse war crimes, particularly over the past 2 decades. And, as we talked about on the show, it's not just Iraq, but particularly Yemen, where American officials feel like they're really open up to war crimes prosecutions because of how much the U.S. has supported Saudi Arabia's very, very, very brutal war in that country. So getting back to our article here, Kiev and other Western countries have pressed the U.S. and the ICC to put Russian officials on trial for months, but Washington has resisted signing on. Earlier this month, the ICC issued arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and another top Russian official for allegedly kidnapping Ukrainian children. At the time, the Department of Defense was blocking Washington from sharing information with the court over concerns it might set a precedent allowing U.S. troops to be prosecuted for similar actions. During the Donald Trump administration, the U.S. sanctioned ICC officials for attempting to investigate American war crimes committed in Afghanistan. Joe Biden lifted the sanctions on the ICC, but denounced the court for investigating both U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan and the Israeli apartheid regime's crimes against Palestinians, including large-scale massacres in the Gaza Strip. Prosecution of Russian officials has also interrupted potential Chinese broker negotiations between Kiev and Moscow. Last week, an advisor to Ukrainian President Zelensky said that the ICC arrest warrant on Putin means there will be no negotiations with the current Russian elite, which also seems to cut against this idea that Zelensky is going to negotiate after Bakhmut falls. But, that could be a separate issue. Just this guy isn't high ranking enough to really make the call as to, how desperate Kiev is to negotiate at the time. As with Russia, the United States does not recognize the ICC. In 2002, President George W. Bush signed into the law the American Service Members Protection Act, also known as the Hague Invasion Act. The bipartisan legislation went as far as to authorize military action against the Netherlands, a fellow founding NATO member, to prevent U.S. officials and military personnel accused of war crimes from facing accountability at the tribunal. The U.S. has spent years pressuring other ICC member states to sign agreements refusing to surrender U.S. troops to the court, in some cases even threatening economic sanctions, aid cuts, or withholding U.S. military assistance. Washington has various restrictions in place preventing U.S. cooperation with the ICC, although recent legislative adjustments have enabled an exemption for the court's investigation and prosecutions linked to the war in Ukraine. So isn't that real convenient, Connor, that we're going to just, look past everything except this current, Cold War that we really want to prosecute against Russia, the proxy war. And of course, as you pointed out, and I think we have seen, that, that prosecution really is getting in the way of potential talks. So, Connor, next week, I think a big story on the show is going to be the Taiwanese president coming to the United States, her potential visit with the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and we had the United States and China trading some threats over this past week. The U.S. is saying China can't get mad over it. It's not a big deal. Where China is very clear that this is a violation of the one China policy and that there will be a response to this. So we'll look more at this next week, Connor, but I expect this to be one of the biggest stories on the show. And now I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, definitely. And before I jump into some of the Middle East stuff, I just wanted to, there might be a possibility, we might find out later. This is just sort of conjecture on my part, but as far as the ICC arrest warrant, the timing of that was very suspicious and seemed, almost like it was designed to thwart peace talks that were potentially being brokered by China. At the time, it was on the eve of Xi's visit to Moscow and then his subsequent meeting with Zelensky, which was expected to happen soon afterwards. But at the time, there was an interview with the ICC, the president of the ICC, Piotr Hofmansky, when the arrest warrants were released in Al Jazeera. And they asked him if he was going to. The question that was put to him was: there was speculation among plenty of experts, and a push for some of the charges to include genocide and crimes against humanity. Can you clarify the choice of language here and the choice of the charges at stake? And he made very clear that no, we are not talking about crimes against humanity. According to the decision of the pretrial chamber, the arrest warrants for alleged war crimes are for the deportation of the children from the Ukrainian occupied territories to the Russian Federation. So I'm just wondering if there was a little bit of arm twisting behind the scenes, because maybe they knew, because there was quite a bit of conjecture that was going to be, that there was not only the deportation charges, but also these crimes against humanity matters that were going to be on the table. And I just wonder if there's anything to do with the fact that the U.S. was already putting together this sort of separate tribunal with the European Union Court and the Ukrainian justice system to prosecute those alleged crimes. Because it's obviously, as we're just talking about, there's no way America can let the ICC handle a situation like that, because it would just set a precedent that would put virtually every president of our lifetime behind bars for life. So, all right. So we're going to jump into the what's going on in the Middle East. Unfortunately, we have to start with some bad news. Israel is bombing Syria again, back to the usual weekly rate of bombings. They bombed Damascus last night and wounded 2 Syrian soldiers. So this is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com from yesterday. Israeli airstrikes hit Damascus early Thursday morning and wounded 2 Syrian soldiers. This is according to Syria's Sanaa news agency. The report said that explosions were heard in Damascus at 1:30 a.m., and a Syrian military source said that Syrian air defenses were confronting hostile targets. Besides the 2 wounded soldiers, material damage was reported as well. The Israeli warplanes launched the airstrikes from the direction of the Golan Heights. Israel hasn't commented on the news and typically does not take credit for these individual strikes in Syria. The incident marks the 4th time this month that Israel has launched airstrikes in Syria. 2 of the operations targeted the Aleppo International Airport and temporarily shut it down. Of course, this was a vital channel for aid deliveries in the wake of the devastating earthquake that hit both Syria and Turkey at the beginning of February. And this follows a pattern of Israel continuing to bomb civilian infrastructure and more frequently now than before, the Syrian airports. Israeli officials claim that their airstrikes in Syria are operations against Iran or Iranian weapons shipments, but as per usual, we see here that they often kill, but in this case, wounding Syrians or Syrian soldiers and damaging civilian infrastructure. Okay, so now we're moving to Iran. Janet Yellen is acknowledging what we all already knew, which is that American sanctions on Iran are helping to destroy the Iranian economy and are making ordinary people suffer horribly, but it's not having any of the desired effects, at least the ostensibly desired effects that American lawmakers claim they're trying to achieve. So we have Janet Yellen acknowledging that the sanctions on Iran have created a, quote, real economic crisis in Iran. But again, have not changed the behavior of Tehran. Quote, our sanctions on Iran have created a real economic crisis in the country, and Iran is greatly suffering economically because of the sanctions. Has that forced a change in behavior? The answer is much less than we ideally would like. Yellen said at a congressional hearing, this would be last Thursday. History shows that sanctions do little to change the governments they target, but always hurt ordinary people in the targeted country. For example, UN experts said last month that more Iranians are dying from thalassemia, a congenital blood disorder due to Western sanctions that deprive them of specialized medicines and ingredients to make them. And once again, this is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com from the 26th. So last year, Alina Duhan, a UN special rapporteur for the impact of unilateral coercive measures, issued a report explaining that the delivery of medicine and medical goods to Iran is severely undermined by sanctions imposed by the U.S. and its Western allies. She also noted that the economic war has caused more food insecurity in the country. She said, quote, food insecurity rates among the population have soared, reaching 60% in certain regions, Duhan said. Despite the failed policy in Iran, Yellen said that she was looking for ways to strengthen the sanctions even more. The Biden administration has followed the Trump's maximum pressure policy against Iran, and they've imposed a large number of new sanctions. Iran has found some relief by increasing its oil sales to Asia. We were covering almost 2 years ago the report in the Wall Street Journal where there was a Biden administration official, I believe, who was remarking that, well, the only real thing you can sanction in Iran anymore is their oil sales to East Asia. Pretty much everything else has had multiple layers of sanctions imposed. Every other sector has already been covered at this point. And so that's what they're targeting. They've been doing that for many years now. It's always companies in the Middle East, and then also these countries that are in Asia, and they're always accused of facilitating Iranian oil shipments. And they're also now targeting Iran's military industry, including their drone industry, over their growing military relationship with Moscow, which is a natural result, of course, of both countries facing this similar pressure. Okay, so this next story is from Al Jazeera. So we have this is more continuing the process of normalization between Riyadh and Tehran. We have the Saudi and Iranian foreign ministers. They're planning to meet sometime during the holy month of Ramadan. So this is from March 27th. Iran and Saudi Arabia's top diplomats have agreed to meet before the end of the holy month of Ramadan to implement a landmark bilateral reconciliation deal brokered by China. Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan and his Iranian counterpart Hossein Amir Abdollahian made the decision after holding their second phone call in less than a week, the official Saudi press agency reported on Monday. During the call, a number of common issues were discussed in light of the tripartite agreement that was signed in China, the SPA said. The two ministers also agreed to hold a bilateral meeting between them during the ongoing month of Ramadan, according to the report. The report did not specify the exact date or the location of the meeting. Ramadan began last week and ends in the third week of April. Saudi officials have said that the meeting is the next step in restoring ties 7 years after they were severed. The deal is expected to see Shia-majority Iran and mainly Sunni Muslim Saudi Arabia reopen their embassies and missions within 2 months and implement security and economic cooperation deals signed more than 20 years ago. Amir Abdollahian told reporters the same day that the two countries have agreed to hold a meeting between their top diplomats and that 3 locations have been suggested without specifying which. The détente between Saudi Arabia, the world's biggest crude oil exporter, and Iran, strongly at odds with Western governments over its nuclear activities and these accusations of them being co-belligerents in the war in Ukraine, has the potential to reshape relations across a region characterized by turbulence for decades. Okay. Now, speaking of this growing multipolar world, particularly and all these changes going on in the Middle East, especially, this is another one from Dave DeCamp on the 29th, Saudi Arabia to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, again, following in Iran's footsteps. On Wednesday, Saudi Arabia's cabinet approved a decision for Riyadh to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a Eurasian security and economic bloc that was founded in 2001 by China, Russia, and several Central Asian countries. According to Saudi state media, Riyadh has approved a memorandum that would make Saudi Arabia a dialogue partner of the SCO, the first step toward permanent membership. The news comes as Saudi Arabia is moving closer to Beijing, raising concern in Washington. According to Reuters, Riyadh joining the SCO was discussed when Chinese President Xi Jinping was visiting Saudi Arabia last December. Saudi Arabia and China have agreed to increase cooperation in all areas during Xi's visit. The Wall Street Journal reported this month that Riyadh is in talks with Beijing on pricing its oil in the yuan, a move that could impact the U.S. dollar's dominance. Saudi Arabia's decision to join the SCO comes after China brokered the surprise normalization deal between Riyadh and Tehran. Last year, Iran signed a memorandum to become a permanent member of the SCO, which is expected to become official this year. Other permanent members include India, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. The SCO is a significant economic bloc as its members make up half the world's entire population. Iran's ascension into the SCO will help the country weather U.S. and other economic sanctions, as it will help increase trade with Russia, China, and other major economies. Okay. Now, this next story is from Al Jazeera. This is part of an exclusive interview with Hossein Amir Abdollahian, Iran's foreign minister, and he's saying now that Iran may set a deadline for nuclear talks with the West. So this is from the 29th. Iran may set a legal deadline for deadlocked talks aimed at restoring the JCPOA, the country's foreign minister has suggested to Al Jazeera in an exclusive interview. The move could happen through the parliament, as some politicians in Tehran are growing increasingly impatient with the unending talks, said Amir Abdollahian. In the parliament, there is this idea that the government should not be perennially in the path of negotiations to bring all parties back to the JCPOA. He said, according to Amir Abdollahian, some factions of Iran's parliament are pushing for proposals and legislation that could make the government's work, quote, more difficult in continuing the talks. The window of the talks to return to the JCPOA won't remain open forever, he told Al Jazeera's Ali Hashem, which sounds like the exact same thing you would have heard from Blinken or Robert Malley at the end of 2021 when the talks got restarted with the new government, or just pretty much that's usually the line that's recited by the American and European diplomats. The last time Iran's conservative parliament passed legislation concerning the JCPOA was in late 2020, when it set a deadline for U.S. sanctions to be removed. When that did not happen, the administration of the centrist former president Hassan Rouhani ramped up uranium enrichment and limited nuclear inspections. There was also, they're leaving out that Israel was assassinating scientists at this time and conducting sabotage attacks that prompted these decisions from the parliament. The administration of President Ibrahim Raisi is politically much closer and unified with the parliament, and both have repeatedly blamed Washington for the lack of results in talks that began almost 2 years ago. The talks have been effectively in limbo since last September, when Tehran and Western parties to the accord accused each other of bad faith in the negotiations. The U.S. and the EU have since imposed multiple rounds of additional sanctions on Iran in response to its crackdown on nationwide protests and for Tehran allegedly supplying Russia with armed drones for use in Ukraine. Tehran has denied providing Russia weapons for the war in Ukraine. Amir Abdollahian reiterated that Tehran's position that Western allies are behind the, quote, riots in the country in the past few months, which he says is hindering talks. We are now at a point where achieving an agreement can be within reach on the condition that the American side acts realistically, he said. According to the foreign minister, technical talks with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, are continuing, and Tehran plans to maintain cooperation with the global nuclear watchdog. Though neither side has provided concrete details on the talks since a couple of weeks ago. On exchanging prisoners with the U.S., Amir Abdollahian said, we haven't tied it to the JCPOA, but there are technical issues that I hope lead to results. Despite the deadlock over the nuclear deal, Iran is moving ahead with its efforts to improve its ties with regional rival Saudi Arabia and potentially other Arab states. The kingdom has also invited the Iranian president for a state visit, which he has welcomed. Iran plans to extend an invitation to Saudi rulers as well, Amir Abdollahian said. We believe returning Tehran and Riyadh's relations to a normal state will not only benefit both countries and nations, but it will benefit the region, he said. Tehran's efforts are not limited to Saudi Arabia, however, as it's been working on improving relations with the UAE and Bahrain. Iran and Bahrain have been relaying messages through Oman, Amir Abdollahian said, and we're in the process of sending delegations to visit embassies and discuss the prospect of normalizing diplomatic relations, which I think would be a huge coup, especially since both these states are, members of they're a part of the Abraham Accords. The foreign minister also held talks with the leaders of Jordan and Egypt during an Iraq-focused conference in December, and he expressed willingness to hold more talks. Quote, fast developments are taking place across the region. Perhaps 10 years ago, there were crises happening fast in the region, in a way that political solutions had fallen behind, Amir Abdollahian said, but now the region is nearing a higher understanding of the realities and international developments, and the region's better understanding of them are encouraging everyone to focus on dialogue, peace, and security across the region. Now there is a new atmosphere of dialogue and cooperation facing the region. Okay, and this last story I have is from The Cradle. It's about Russia and Iran discussing increasing their regional cooperation. So, Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian met with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on Wednesday in Moscow to discuss regional cooperation, the war in Ukraine, and Saudi Arabia, according to Press TV. The report said the reviews on the long-term strategic this is Hossein Amir Abdollahian speaking. He said reviews on the long-term strategic cooperation agreement between the two countries have been finalized in Russia. Iran has also examined it. I hope that in less than a month, the final revision of the agreement will be carried out by Iran's foreign ministry. He said during the meeting, high-ranking Iranian and Russian delegations are at different levels exchanging views, and the presidents of the two countries are in constant contact with each other, he added. Meanwhile, Sergei Lavrov affirmed that there was no alternative to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and that the agreement should be implemented as soon as possible. He said the world is waiting for the United States to return to its obligations under the nuclear agreement and to the lifting of all sanctions, Lavrov added. In addition, Abdollahian said that there were still some outstanding issues with Saudi Arabia, but that they will not be an obstacle to resuming relations with its Gulf neighbor. He says there are still some outstanding problems between Saudi Arabia and Iran, but they cannot be considered obstacles to resuming relations and opening embassies, he said, adding that discussions with his Saudi counterpart, Faisal bin Farhan, have been fruitful. Amir Abdollahian also said the relationship with Russia is on the right track, and he has expressed his hopes for cooperation to continue and intensify. Iran and Saudi Arabia are largely at odds when it comes to regional politics and ideology. However, the recent agreement signed between both states is an important step to reestablishing its relationship, which had been at its worst point when protesters in Iran attacked the diplomatic mission of Saudi Arabia following the execution of prominent Saudi Arabian Shia cleric Sheikh Namir Bakr al-Namir. So we just see more and more cooperation and multilateralism going on here with the more and more diplomacy between former adversaries in the region, especially as it appears that the U.S. is slowly shifting away from the Middle East to focus more on China in the Asia pivot, of course. And further in Eastern Europe. And this process has been going on for a couple years now, at least since the withdrawal from Afghanistan, although Iraq was brokering talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran before then. But what we're seeing now, I think, is a rapid escalation in basically these countries that are just, circumventing the U.S. empire in the Middle East and realizing that they have much more to gain by resuming, normal relations with each other, as we've seen with Saudi Arabia and Syria last week. There's just no reason that they have to follow U.S. dictates anymore. And it's funny to see, because I know Dave spoke to the State Department recently. There was a quote in one of Dave DeCamp's recent articles where he asked the State Department, what's your position on, do you still stand by your policy that we refuse to normalize with Syria, even in the wake of these, developments? And they said that in response to Riyadh and Damascus agreeing to establish relations, said, no, we are committed to essentially regime change, that there will be no normalization, and we absolutely oppose it on the regional level anyway. So, Israel is continuing to escalate its violence against its neighbors, and the U.S., obviously Janet Yellen thinks that the problem with Iran is that there's just not enough sanctions, there's not enough maximum pressure. So it's only going to drive these countries to do more of what they're doing now, which I think is a very good thing. And obviously, hopefully there's going to be more coalitions in Congress to end these occupations in Syria and Iraq, although Rand's effort, the response was not a good sign, but that doesn't mean can't keep trying.
Right. All right, Connor, thank you so much for the update. Everybody, thank you for tuning into our show this week. We'll be back with more shows next week. Just remember, share the show if you can. Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com. YouTube, Rumble, Odysee for the video version. Podcast, it's up anywhere you could listen to podcasts. If you're a new listener, you enjoy the show, make sure you just subscribe to it somewhere so you don't miss an episode. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Connor.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, everybody.